Hi, how you doing? This is Lee again, a crazy old man. Today's show is called Death is Not an End, but a Beginning. And I did this show when I was on at BTR, that horrible radio place, and about 2 years ago. And I decided to do it again. And if I like it, well, I do like it, but I may add to it, and I may not. I don't know. We'll find out. So, here we go. Picture an outdoor wedding. The groom waiting for the bride at the end of the driveway, and there's a flowered thing going over where the groom is standing, and the preacher standing next to the groom. And then you see the bridesmaids and the ushers and best man coming down the aisle to the Unchained melody. a good beginning for a marriage. Just before people started coming, it was raining. But when people started coming, it stopped raining. And as a minister said, I now pronounce you man in life, the sun came out. Now, wouldn't you think that marriage would last? Wouldn't you think that was a good sign? Well, it was a good sign. It was a good marriage for 5 years. And 5 years after that, started going downhill. And they ended it after 10 years. That was my marriage. But I'm not sad about it. We had a good time together in the beginning. And we had a good life together. But for many reasons, it started to fall apart. Then when I went broke, I decided that best thing to do would be to let her go, let my son go, let the house go and everything I owned, except for the clothes on my back and a lazy boy chair. Even in hard times, life can be good. And even at the end of that life, you will live again. We do not die, our body dies. And if we live halfway decent lives, probably go up. If we live nasty lives, we'll go down. If you're in the middle, you may stick around for a while. Or you may get another chance with another life. Of course, you won't remember the first life. People, when they hear me say that, sometimes think I'm crazy, but I believe it. I believe in the afterlife because I died twice. I saw the light. And I came close to death probably about 13 other times. And I'm still here. I'm still here because I guess God wants me to be here. And I try to help other people. That's what the Crazy Old Man Network is about. It's about helping. I know a lot of my shows are anti-government, and a lot of them are against the problems we have here on Earth. And a lot of them I try to wake people up and have them rebel like they're doing now. First it was in the Middle East and Northern Africa. And then it started in Europe. People getting upset about what the backers have done to them, about what big business has done. And now there's demonstrations all around our country and around the world with the Occupy Wall Street starting. Here in Detroit and Lansing, Michigan, too. On October 21st, they're going to have Occupy Michigan. I plan on being the one in Detroit because it's going to be pretty close to where I live. Just hop on the bus and I'll be there in about 5 minutes. And I want you, if there's one near you, go to it. Demonstrate. Demonstrate for your rights. Now I'm starting to get off the subject, but I just had to say that. By the way, I'm Lee Gaylord, Crazy Old Man. This is the Crazy Old Man Network. And I said a few things about Troy Davis. I've had a few shows on the death penalty. And Troy Davis was executed. According to his death certificate, it says it was a homicide. He was murdered by the state of Georgia. The odds are he was innocent. Even the jurors that convicted him say that if they knew what they knew now, they would have said not guilty. That's what happens, not only down south, but here in the north in some areas. It's one of the reasons I'm against the death penalty. But it's Troy Davis' body is dead, but he's not. His soul goes on. And he's in the hearts of many who are fighting the death penalty. And so I'm going to start the show off with, this is from Building Bridges, a radio show that's part of Pacifica. It's called Abolish the Death Penalty, a memorial to Troy Davis. And after that, I'll be talking about life and death. And if you want to get involved in the conversation, you can. So here we go.
This is Building Bridges, produced and hosted by Mimi Rosenberg and Ken Nash. The death penalty is the ultimate denial of human rights. It is the premeditated, cold-blooded killing of a human being by the state. While this cruel, inhuman, and degrading punishment is done in the name of justice, it violates the right of life as proclaimed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Building Bridges opposes the death penalty in all cases, without exception, regardless of the nature of the crime, the characteristics of the offender, or the method used by the state to kill the prisoner.
We're joined by Stephen Bright, President and Senior Counsel of the Southern Center for Human Rights, law professor who twice argued and won cases before the United States Supreme Court involving racial composition of the juries. He has testified on many occasions before committees of both the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. His and the Center's work has been the subject of a documentary film, Finding for Life in the Death Belt, and 2 books, Proximity to Death and Finding Life on Death Row.
Before we hear from Stephen Bright, let's listen to a brief statement from the sister of Troy Davis, Martina Correa, and a commentary from death row journalist Mumia Abu-Jamal on the execution of Troy Davis.
What we need to do is we need to let politicians know that you will not be elected if you do not do something about these atrocities that are happening in our state and in the prison and jail system. We will not sit by while you idly put our children of school age in prison and jail. We will not sit by and watch you deter movements of change. But I'm here to tell you that I'm going to stand here for my brother today. Let's get to work and let's show Georgia that we will not stand by and we will defy them. Yes.
This is Mumia Abu Jamal. Troy Davis, Movement Lessons. The state judicial murder of Troy Davis of Georgia showed both the limits and the successes of the anti-death penalty movement. It seems silly to speak of successes when a man is poisoned to death by judicial decree, but though they were partial, they were successes nonetheless. To attain the support of people like former U.S. President Jimmy Carter, Pope Benedict XVI, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and former FBI Director William Sessions was no small feat. It showed the reach of the movement to procure such support. The movement was also fueled by such revelations as shown by the recantations of people like Antoine Williams, who was one of the state's witnesses. Williams later stated, quote, "After the officers talked to me, they gave me a statement and told me to sign it. I signed it. I did not read it because I cannot read. I felt pressured to point at him," unquote. Was there police coercion in Davis's case? The DA certainly thought so, and was quoted as saying, "Oh, well, they were probably coerced by the defense too, so that balances it out, and we should still kill him." Think about that. What power of coercion does the defense possess? Handcuffs, threats, jail cells, criminal charges, death sentences? That any prosecutor can say something so dopey is, well, nuts. The Troy Davis movement amassed almost 1 million signatures on petitions. Remarkable. But signatures on paper or online aren't people in the streets. If 1 million people were on the march, maybe he would be alive. Maybe. The limits of the law, blockades imposed in part, ironically, by a former constitutional professor who came to be seen as the first black president, I speak here of Bill Clinton, also denied Troy Davis true redress. Troy Davis's family and supporters brought much to the anti-death penalty movement. I hope they're not too disheartened to continue the struggle. Such struggle will ensure that Troy Davis will not be forgotten. From death row, this is Mumia Abu Jamal.
Well, I wanted to just set the pace for our discussion with Stephen Bright. And indeed, Stephen, if we could pick up some of what Mumia Abu Jamal himself on death row laid out, do we have a fair and equitable system such that there are fail-safes against tragedies of execution of the innocent?
Well, I think the answer is no, and I would say he gave a very good summary of the case and the situation there. But I think the entire criminal justice system, at least in terms of its dealing with poor people, is a very crude instrument. Most poor people are represented by court-appointed lawyers. Very often they don't have the expertise or the resources, and often they carry such huge caseloads that they can't really provide individual representation to people. So we have innocent people that are, people admit now that there are a lot of innocent people that have been convicted in all kinds of cases because DNA evidence has revealed beyond any doubt that many people who were convicted by juries were in fact completely innocent. The unfortunate thing is that's only 10% of the cases that can have some bodily fluid that can be tested with DNA. The other 90% of the cases, I think there's an equal number probably of innocent people, but you don't have that ability to prove conclusively that a person is innocent.
If we can pick apart and go maybe piece by piece of the justice system and look at the problematic within that for cases that involve a request for the death penalty, maybe we can start with, you began the issue of representation. Let's parse that out a little bit more, the problem with quality representation. How has that been reflected in people who indeed have been sentenced to death?
Well, very often it's been just disgraceful. I mean, in Houston, which executes more people than any other place, 3 people were sentenced to death at trials where the lawyers fell asleep during the trials. One of those people has been executed, and Texas is trying to execute one of the others. So that's how low the standard is. At the time Davis was tried, the local judges in Savannah were just appointing lawyers to represent people, and they didn't necessarily have the expertise in defending a death case. They certainly didn't have the investigative and expert resources that they needed. And the power of the prosecutor is so tremendous here, the ability to tell people, you'll stay in jail until you tell us what we want to hear. As Mumia pointed out, that's not something the defense can do. Nor can a defense lawyer say, we'll dismiss the charges against you if you testify a certain way. Of course, we can back up one more notch on this. This is not about counsel, but it's a point worth making. When you have identification cases, you have the greatest likelihood of mistakes being made. I don't doubt that there was coercion here, but I also think that people trying to reconstruct what happened in a parking lot at 1 o'clock in the morning when it was dark and gunshots were being fired and all that, you're not going to get a very accurate portrayal of what happened at that time.
The issue of poverty, economic status, and the issue of race, how does that factor into those who lose their life through state execution?
Well, Davis is a classic case of a black man charged with the murder of a white man, a police officer. It's the classic death penalty case. Death penalty is reserved pretty much in Georgia and throughout the country for people who kill white people, even though African Americans are the victims of more murders than white people, even though they're only 13% of the population. About 80% of the people on death row are there for murders of white people. And there are no cases that get ratcheted up as much on the race issue as interracial crimes like this one. So that's another factor that comes into play. And when you have the intersection of race and poverty, you have sort of a double disadvantage in the case that would not be there, if it was a person of means and if it was a white person and so forth.
73% of the executions since, I believe it was 1976, have been in southern states, and 38% in Texas. What explains that?
Well, Texas is the easiest to explain. You give someone a very bad lawyer at trial, they get convicted and sentenced to death. Then you give them an equally bad or maybe even a worse lawyer for the review process. In Texas, there have been 10 cases where people didn't even have federal review because the lawyers assigned to them missed the deadline for filing. That's about as basic as it gets. If you can't file on time, you're really the bottom of the profession. At any rate, so you can execute a lot of people if you do that. And, of course, Texas executed about 475 now. Of those cases where people missed the deadline, one lawyer missed it for 3 different people. And my question has always been, why didn't the Texas bar step in, or why didn't the Texas court step in? Why didn't somebody say, if this man can't even file on time, he shouldn't be assigned any more cases? He's still handling capital cases today.
The issue of the appointment versus the election of judges. What roles do judges really play in death penalty cases, and what's the significance of whether or not they would be appointed or elected?
Well, in all the states of the old Confederacy, the states that really you were talking about a moment ago, are most of where the executions take place, the judges are elected. And there's no bigger issue in a judicial election than the death penalty. So you have prosecutors running for judge based on how many times they sought and obtained the death penalty. You have judges who know that if they rule against the government in a case, against the prosecution, they're signing their own political death warrant because someone's going to run against them in the next election, and that ruling is going to cost them their job. That's always the issue in judicial elections. I should also say in Alabama, which is one of the other states that contributes to the large number of executions from the South, the judges can override the jury's sentence. So a jury from Alabama can send somebody to life in prison, and the judge can override it and impose the death penalty. And about a fourth of the people on death row, it's about 200 on death row in Alabama, about a fourth of those were overrides where the judge disagreed with the jury. And they almost never override the other way. It's always life to death.
We've looked at the fallibility of eyewitness identification. We've looked at the pressure on the judiciary from elections in conservative areas. And what about the review process? We've been taught to believe that there is an extended appeal process, and that's going to remedy any errors of law that may indeed have been made by the judiciary or indeed in other instances within the context of a trial. Is that the case?
Well, there are two factors there. I mean, first, with regard to what's so important in these cases is the investigation and the development of facts, and facts that may show innocence or facts that may show the death penalty is not appropriate for this person. Those are very difficult for reviewing courts to, well, if they're not presented, there's nothing to review. There may later be a claim of ineffective lawyering. But with regard to a lot of other issues, the Supreme Court and the states have set up so many technical barriers to having appellate courts look at those cases. If the lawyer didn't object at the right time, if the lawyer didn't file a motion, if the lawyer didn't ask for a jury instruction, if the lawyer didn't object to a jury instruction that was given, then the reviewing courts will not look at that. And sort of the irony of this is that a person, death row people don't pick or people facing the death penalty don't pick their lawyers. They're assigned to them. So they may be assigned a very bad lawyer who fails to make these objections and file what ought to be filed and whatever, but it's the client. It's the person who is convicted and sentenced to death who pays the price for that. And then, of course, some people, if they miss the deadline for filing, they don't get any review at all. So there just simply is no review, no federal review in those cases. And the federal review is very important because that's the only time that these cases are reviewed by life-tenured judges who don't have to worry about being voted out of office if they make a ruling in favor of a death row inmate.
I understand that there's not a right to counsel on the appeals process after the initial conviction. Is that the case? And if that's the case, then do some defendants not have lawyers for that process?
Yes, that is the case. And I should say in non-capital cases, it's almost impossible for a person who's been convicted, even though they may be sentenced to a long prison term or even life without parole, they may not be able to ever challenge their conviction because they just simply don't have a lawyer. And it's a very technical and very much a specialty. So the idea that some inmate is going to do this on his own is sort of like my going to the airport and getting in the cockpit and flying the plane to New York because the pilot's not there. I mean, it's just not going to happen. In the death penalty cases, generally either some lawyer volunteers, some organization like ours or some other organization comes forward to provide the representation. in the state courts. But there have been people who did not have lawyers. Xavier Gibson in Georgia had a habeas corpus hearing in which he represented himself. It's in a death penalty case. And every time the judge called upon him to make a statement or cross-examine or whatever, he said, I don't know what I'm doing. I need a lawyer. And it's just a farce of a hearing. The state, of course, was represented by two lawyers who specialize in capital cases. He is, a young man who probably didn't have even an average IQ, and he's completely baffled by what's going on.
I don't think that many people in New York fully realize that we have states that don't have public defender processes as well, just before we even get to the issue of capital cases.
Right, well, that's very true. And in states like Alabama and Texas do not have public defenders. They often have court-appointed lawyers appointed by the judge. Sometimes it's a patronage appointment. But when you have that system, you don't develop the expertise that you have in public defender offices where people are trained and supervised and you have some kind of quality control. What usually happens in public defender offices is just the caseloads become impossible. But at least you have people that know what they're doing and are dedicated. Some of the lawyers appointed to cases in Alabama and Texas and other states really are not competent to handle any kind of case and shouldn't be practicing law.
We now have 1,269 persons who were executed since the Supreme Court lifted its ban on the practice in 1976. That's pretty staggering, and it's staggering to know all the inequities. But at the same time, we are moving forward. There seems to be growing indication that, as a matter of fact, I think we have 10 more states before we can really look to the abolishment of the death penalty. But am I correct that there are more jurors, for example, who are showing greater reluctance to vote for the ultimate penalty, among other things?
I was going to say the most encouraging thing that's happening is that the number of death sentences that are imposed every year, I'm not talking about executions, but what juries are doing in terms of imposing the death penalty. In the late 90s, it was around 300 a year, which really is not that many when you consider how big the country is. But today, it's just over 100. So it's dropped by two-thirds, and it's increasingly isolated to Texas and Alabama, Nevada, a handful of states. And if that trend continues, if the numbers continue to go down and the death penalty continues to be used in only a small number of jurisdictions, I mean, even in states like Texas, I mean, over 100 of the executions carried out in Texas were imposed in Houston. So that one county, Harris County, accounted for more executions, actually, than any state in the Union has carried out, except for Texas itself. And that's what you find in around the country, is that there's these little jurisdictions, not little necessarily, but there are these jurisdictions that account for most of the death sentences in that state. Often you change prosecutors, and you don't have the death penalty coming out of those places anymore. But I think a lot of people, a lot of prosecutors have given up on the death penalty. They know it's sort of law enforcement quackery. And I think people generally, one thing, as Mumia said, that will come out of the Troy Davis execution, sad as it is that many people will have second thoughts about the death penalty. And I think it will be much harder for prosecutors in Georgia and other places to obtain the death penalty, because many people were shaken to the core by the Davis case. They followed it. They learned about it. They were invested in it. They were sure that the Pardon and Parole Board would do the right thing, and then he was abruptly executed. And I think that shows, and we have other cases from time to time that just show the inequities of the death penalty, and more people are learning from that. And I think the result of that is fewer and fewer death sentences. Georgia itself has not imposed a death sentence in a couple of years. It used to impose 15 or 20 every year. So it's a big change going forward. So I hope we will see an eventual abandonment of the death penalty like the rest of the world.
Stephen, you this summer, I know you've argued before the Supreme Court, you this summer had a death penalty case. Just to put in another face on why we are so adamant about the abolition, your own experience that also teaches us to move in the direction and fight for the abolition of the death penalty in the remaining states.
Well, I think very few people understand that the two most important decisions made in every capital case is first the decision whether to seek the death penalty. There are many prosecutors who never seek it. In fact, most, if you look at all the counties in America, most of the prosecutors do not seek the death penalty in the states that authorize it. If the prosecutor does seek it, that's usually, not everywhere, but most places, it's a decision made by one person, usually a white man. And then the next decision is whether to plea bargain the case. And most death penalty cases are resolved by those two decisions. There's no judge or jury or anybody else involved in it. But if the prosecutor persists and wants the death penalty, one person can force a case to trial, which is what happened to me this summer, in a case that certainly was not one of the more heinous cases. It was a murder case, so of course it was very tragic, and it was a loss to the community, but it certainly didn't compare to multiple murderers and people that had prior convictions for murder and other people, whatever. But the prosecutor has political ambitions, insisted on seeking the death penalty, and so we went through a long jury selection and ultimately a trial. Unfortunately, came out without the death penalty, but so much of what was put into that case was put in by me and my office, the Southern Center for Human Rights. If it had been left just to the state of Georgia and the lawyers it provided, it could have very well been a different outcome.
Well, Stephen Bright, I want to thank you for the work that you do, most importantly, and for helping us make out the case for the abolition of capital cases, the abolition of the death penalty, and we will continue to follow the work of the Southern Center for Human Rights and yourself. It's too important for a society not to allow the state to execute people in a cold and calculated way. In its name, it just breeds inhumanity. Thank you very much for joining me.
Well, I think it does. I often say it coarsens a society. It not only is extremely degrading to the person who's tied down and put down, but it's degrading to the society that does it. It says a lot about what kind of people we are and what kind of society we want to have. And we should not be a vengeful, merciless society. I hope someday we won't be.
Thank you very much. We've been speaking with Stephen Bright, President and Senior Counsel of the Southern Center for Human Rights. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's go to the protests around Troy Davis.
My name is Ann Wright. I'm a retired U.S. Army colonel. I'm a former U.S. diplomat who resigned in opposition to the war in Iraq. And I'm here to challenge U.S. policies on the execution, that we execute people still in this day and time, state-sponsored murder. And there were two people that were executed. One that was a white supremacist racist who drugged a young black man behind his truck. Horrible, horrible crime. And yet the family of that young black man said, don't execute that man. And then we have Troy Davis, an African-American man who, by all indications, did not commit a murder of a police officer. And there's plenty of evidence that the court should have gone back over to look at, and yet they didn't, and he was executed. And so I'm here to say that we must stop the death penalty.
We are Troy Davis! We are Troy Davis! We are Troy Davis!
Yeah, I came to pay tribute to Troy Davis and his fight. You know, he was on death row. They just executed him. I'm against the death penalty. I think it's racist. I think we need a social movement from the ground up to overturn it, because the politicians aren't going to do it. it has to come from the bottom. The people have to reject it.
I'm here to stand in solidarity with brothers and sisters, friends, colleagues, comrades, fighting for an abolishment of the death penalty, but also fighting for justice in the case of Troy Davis. We fought to keep him alive, and now we're going to continue to fight for justice in his death. We believe that there was not enough guilt beyond a reasonable doubt to execute Troy Anthony Davis.
Troy Davis! Troy Davis!
This has been Building Bridges, your community and labor report with Mimi Rosenberg
and Ken Nash. And log on to our website at www.buildingbridgesradio.org.
Building Bridges is an excellent radio show, and they talk about the bad things in our society and with our government. And that's all I'm going to say on the death penalty. The rest of the show is going to be on life and death and how death is not an end in its beginning. The reason I say that is that when our body dies, our soul is on. Our body is just a vehicle for us to get around on Earth. And I had a talk with a minister one time who was, he taught in a seminary. And one of his classes, he was teaching about the soul. And after I finished talking to him, he said, I'm going to use what you said in my class. Now, my ideas on the soul are not because of my religion. They're because of experience and because of things I've seen. When I was 7 years old, I drowned. And I saw the light, and I went up there. And a few years later, I saw an old family picture, and there was this lady in there. And I told my father, I said, I've seen this lady. And he said, she died before you were born. But I did see her in that near-death experience. So it gave me an indication that it wasn't a dream. And I had another one a few years back, about 15 years ago, when I had a stroke while I was driving. And then was my father. My father passed away about 15 years before my mother. Maybe only 10. But I was in a car accident. And I was on a 2-lane highway making a left turn. And I saw a car coming fast behind me, and I had a feeling it was going to hit me, but there wasn't anywhere for me to go. And the guy hit me, doing about 70, 75. He was a truck driver. And my car went across the highway, and there was a car coming in the other direction. That's why I couldn't make the turn. And I sideswiped that car and ended up on the other side of the road. My car was totaled. And the only thing it was worth was scrap metal. And the rear bumpers held the front doors closed. And then but before I got hit, it was like my father's spirit sat next to me. And he said, Lee, relax. There ain't anything you can do about it, so relax. That was his philosophy of life. And I totally relaxed, and I wasn't even scratched. And I had to climb out the window because I couldn't open the door. And a cop came, and a cop looked at me and said, who's the driver of this car? And I said, I am. He said, you're supposed to be dead. And I looked at the car again and said, yep, I'm supposed to be dead. The only part that wasn't damaged was where I was sitting. And so I credit my father with saving my life, even though he was dead. And my mother, the reason she lived on was because she felt my father's presence in the house. And everybody that knew her and went to the house could feel her presence. My daughter called me up one time and said, Dad, I'm not going back to Grandma's house. And I said, why not? She said, the Grandpa's still there. I said, well, he's a good ghost. Don't worry about it. I've seen a lot of cases where a spirit would be around me. Some people don't believe it, but I swear it's the truth. And because of that, I'm not afraid of dying. But I want to stay around. And in the studies on near-death experiences, in case of suicide attempts, they saw hell. So there's no way in hell I want to attempt a suicide, because if I'm successful, that's where I'll be, is hell. And I really don't want to do that. It's, yeah, I just feel that as long as you live a good life, maybe you'll be bad in the beginning, but you'll mend your ways as you get older. With Troy Davis, he is free now. And like I say, he's in the hearts of many. Just like my father and my mother are in my heart. And if I need them, they're there. I may not see them, but I feel them. And they tell me what to do. I can't hear them, but I feel it. It seems like our society is, they feel that death is the end. And my father and mother's case, there was no funeral. There was, when my mother passed away, my brother and I were happy for her, because she was with my father. And I know my father waited for her. And when we pass away, I know that we are going to see my mother and father again. And others who we loved who passed away. I'm sure my grandmother's up there, and she was a wonderful lady. Very active right to the end. And when she was about 96, she asked God to take her, and he did. So, again, in her case, there were no tears. We were happy for her. And in most cases, that's the way it should be. Now, I know that there are young people who pass on, and you wonder why. But then you think about what they would be going through in the future. You think about what their life's going to be like. And maybe, just maybe, they're better off. And they can watch their brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers. And they're still around if you need them. Again, you may not believe me, but I'm willing to bet that when you die, you'll know I'm right, and you'll be happy. Life can be very difficult. I had an excellent childhood. I think my parents were the best parents in the world. Never argued. In fact, I told my mother one time that the reason I had 2 divorces was because she and Dad were so happy together. And when I got in the real world, I found the arguing, and I couldn't take it. It took me 14 years to get out of the first marriage. The second marriage in the beginning was great. In the end, it took me 5 years to get out of that. We were married for 10 years. Well, we were together for 10 years, not married for 10 years. But another thing, people are changing as time goes on. Sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad. And so when you get married, 10 years or maybe 5 years from the time you get married, you'll wonder who it is that you married, because they'll change, and you'll change. Like I say, sometimes the change is good. Sometimes it's for the bad. That's why we have so many divorces. People are realizing that it doesn't make any sense to stay in a bad marriage. That's why I think that marriage ceremony should stay until change to us part, not until death to us part. I just want you to understand that what happens is going to happen. You never know when. You don't know how unless you get sick, get some disease that, like cancer. Then you might get an idea when. But don't despair. Keep an open mind. Keep your hope. Keep your hope for a cure, no matter how bad it looks. But if by a chance the cure doesn't come, remember that the pain will be gone when you pass away. Remember that life goes on. You may have heard of cryogenics. That's where they freeze the body until there's a cure for what killed them. Then when they get the cure, they bring you back to life and cure you. And you continue with your life. There's one big fallacy to that. You are not your body. when you die, you are gone. The body is still there, unless they're cremated, which is what I want. But if and when they bring that body back to life, it will not be you. There's no way in hell you'll want to get back in that body. You're having too much fun without a body. So it won't work. What they'll have is some insane person. Won't be the person that was there in the first place, because that person's gone. So think about it. And maybe you'll agree with me, and maybe you won't. But you'll find out when the time comes. I'm going to play a song. It's a soundtrack for a short video called "A Day in the Death of Donnie B" by Louis Mucciolo. If you go to archive.org, put "A Day in the Death of Donnie B" in there in the search engine, you'll find it. And it's also on my blogs. But it's music and talking. And as you're listening to it, think about a young man going around looking for his drugs.
A day in the death of Donnie B. Strung out, waiting to die. Nothing to laugh at, no one to cry. Just another dirty gray day in the death of Donnie B. Just another dirty gray day in the death of Donnie B.
Drugs is just a waste of time.
Just to be normal, you have to go through a lot of hell.
It's like suicide, jumping off a bridge.
I know he's killing himself, and I have a sneaking suspicion that he knows it also.
This is one of the places where you usually find a junkie. This cold, narrow, steel barred cell. You'll see him in here, double up in pain, sweating it out, waiting for tomorrow.
I really didn't know who I was, what I was or where I was going.
He is socially dead, morally dead, and soon he will be physically dead.
Drugs are a cop-out. It really doesn't help the matter any. Makes it worse.
You're a poor person. Here you have a very expensive habit. In fact, you're really living like a rich person, because here you're giving yourself something which is going to cost you quite a few dollars per day. And where's the money going to come from? No one's going to give you that much money a day. And as your habit grows, in other words, as you use more and more drugs, this is inevitable. It's going to happen that you need more and more money. And no one's going to give you that as a gift. No one is going to have to be sorry for you and give you money just to be giving you money, but because you look sick, because your habit is coming down on you. You're going to have to get the money somehow, so you're going to steal.
There's no future for him. As it stands in reality, there is no present because he's really non-existent. His whole world consists of, let's say, of him. The economic crisis consists mainly of the hassle of trying to get that dollar, stealing, lying, cheating their friends. They like to use people for what they can get. They might as well be dead.
My husband has been around this problem quite some time, and when it hit our family, at first, it sounds so cruel for my husband to say, well, I guess I better go out and get some more insurance out on him, because since he doesn't give a damn about his own life, at least we can make some money from it. And I thought this was very cruel to have my husband say something like this. But then when you sit down and think about it realistically, this is exactly what he's doing.
What has to happen, the addict has to change his present view that he has of himself. If he doesn't, he will remain a walking corpse. And until this thing happens, he will continue on this path to nowhere.
It's a day in the death of Donnie B. Can't see a blue sky above. Can't feel the raindrops. Can't feel the sun. Can't know a lover. Couldn't have one. Can't feel the snowflakes. Can't work or play. Too busy finding a fix for the day. Just another weary, worry day in the death of Donnie B. Just another weary, worry day in the death of Donnie B.
When you come into court, you see these people standing before the law, you can realize, gee, I remember seeing that person walking around, the neighborhood, a few months ago. And they must have seen all the addicts, they must have seen the people hanging on the streets. people that were without clothes and shelter because they used drugs. But that didn't seem to impress their minds. They probably were saying to themselves, well, that will never happen to me. I'm starting to use drugs, but I know I won't be like that. I'm not that old, I'm young, and I can take care of it. I can control my habit and all this kind of thing, you know.
Most of the people we do arrest are the minor people, the street addicts, the 18, 19-year-old person who is on junk, use 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 bags a day. Arrest them for either living narcotics itself or for committing various crimes they need to do in order to get the money to supply their habit. And he spends anywhere from 6 months to 2, 3, 4 years in jail on each offense.
It's kind of hard to see a young person almost near death because he's stuck a needle on this person who's vital, who has got a lot of life in him, who should be going to school and who should be playing, you know, playing basketball or something, yet and had the body to be able to do these things. This happens time after time. Seeing even teenagers almost dying, fighting death. Many people stand around in the crowd, you know, and watching this person if they see this kind of thing, and there's not too much sympathy for it. This is a different kind of death.
He's sleepy, his nose is running, he itches. He feels cold, he feels hot. He doesn't even know what the sun really looks like. He's literally living in a world of illusion. He's like a zombie.
It's a way of living for Donnie B. Jiving his friends for a buck, and nothing else matters. Nobody cares. Hanging around to raise a little bread for the death of Donnie B. Hanging around to raise a little bread for the death of Donnie B.
The great bulk of the junkies are still in the same place I left them at. 25 years ago, I was in the street, a detective making an arrest, and today I see the same fellas who've been to jail off and on the same corners, in the same stinking cellars, in the same rooftops, and their friends have died of overdoses or just being sick from the junk. And they're still in the same spot, and nothing has changed for them. But most of them I've known 20 years ago are dead or in jail.
I found better things to do. I saw that wasn't me. I wanted to live to be an old man, real old man. It's hard to describe. It's just really a way of killing yourself.
No more school, no more future. It's an abysmal end. And I tell you, I'm not trying to put any kids down or any people down, but start with junk. It puts you down.
It's the needle and vein for Donnie B. Freezing his muscle and brain. Bottle cap living, bottle cap dead. Just another dirty gray dawn in the death of Donnie B. Just another dirty gray dawn in the death of Donnie B.
So it's a pretty rough story. There's no easy way to tell a guy, don't take it because you get jaundice, because you get syphilis, because you die. No, he doesn't want to listen. This guy knows everything about dope. The only thing he doesn't know that when I see them in the autopsy room on a Monday morning, you see this fish-eyed look looking up at the ceiling. It's the end of the road. And then you got to call the old lady and his mother and tell her to pick up the brown paper bag up front and take all his clothes. That's the end of the road for her boy. And then she says, why?
Goodbye, Donnie. You're feeling no pain. Messing up your life with that needle and vein. another dirty gray dawn in the death of Donnie B. Just another dirty gray dawn in the death of Donnie B. Say goodbye to the people, Donnie. You're going away soon. Goodbye, Donnie. Goodbye, Donnie. Goodbye, Donnie. Goodbye.
You know, you look at the drug addicts that pass away, and you think, what a wasted life. But then on the other hand, they're no longer drug addicts. The soul doesn't get addicted. It's the body that gets addicted, and you no longer have the body, so you're no longer addicted. Before I forgot to tell you what I was talking about. There have been studies of the brain, and don't ask me where I get this information because I got it somewhere. And the human brain is in two parts. One part is instinct. That's called the old brain. The other part, the new brain, is called logic. And I say that's the soul. And that's where this preacher agreed with me. And old cartoons used to have a devil and an angel fighting to control the cartoon character. And the devil would lose sometimes, the angel would lose sometimes. Mostly the angel lost. That's what happens when it comes to drug addiction. You have a dispute within the good and the bad. The bad is the old brain, the instinct. It tells you this stuff is good. You got to have it. And when the old brain loses to the new brain, or the angel loses to the devil, the addiction comes in. In order to get rid of that addiction, the angel has to come back and fight and win. How? Well, when I quit getting drunk the first time, I realized that getting drunk did not solve my problem. What I needed to do was to get out of the situation I was trying to escape from with alcohol. The best way to get out of the solution was to escape. And I left the wife and I quit getting drunk the day I left her. I'm not saying this to condemn her. In fact, a couple of years later, she admitted to me that she was the cause of my drinking, just as her mother was the cause of her father's drinking. But I told her that it's not her fault. It was my fault. I should have left a long time before. But back then, they stayed together for the kids, which is a mistake. Because the kids know that something's wrong. And they're much better off without the arguing of being around them. So, what I do when I'm dealing with an addict, I try and find out why they're addicted, what caused their addiction. It could be a death in the family, a death of a friend. It's something that they're trying to escape from. So I have to convince them that they're worth saving too. I have to get them to love themselves. I have to get them to know themselves. And I have to get them to be themselves. Because an addict is not themselves. I've had a lot of friends die because of drugs. To me, just maybe they're better off. May not sound nice, like a nice thing to say, but if that's the only way to get them off the drugs, they're happy now. Because they don't have that monkey on their back. Think about it. Think about sick people that die. They're no longer sick. I truly believe that anything bad, anything bad that happens is actually for the good. And all the bad things that happened to me, I got good out of them in the end. And that's life. Life is full of tests. To me, life is an education, and I try and learn from it. I try and learn from the bad things and turn them into good. And I've always found a way to do that since I realized that that's what you got to do. I started studying life when I was a kid, studying people. What really started me was Atlanta, Georgia in the 50s and how the whites treated the blacks. And it really bothered me. My best friend was black, and he couldn't come to my house because his mother said that if he did, my white friends would never talk to me again, and the same with other parents from the neighborhood. They wouldn't talk to my parents. My parents personally didn't care. And I didn't care. Because if a friend stops being your friend because you're with someone that's different, they're no longer your friend. They never were your friend. In a way, I may be straying off the subject, but maybe not. It's part of life. is being around people who are different. We're all equal, but we're all different. And frankly, I like the difference. I spend most of my time with people who are in trouble. Addicts, prostitutes, ex-criminals, criminals. Try to help them. And they appreciate it. I've helped a few people get off of drugs. But I also had a lot of friends die from drugs. Some of them were ODs. Some of them were heart attacks. Some of them were shootings. And it bothered me. But then I realized they're free now. And it still bothers me. I would much rather see him alive and kicked to habit. But with some people, they're not going to kick it. They're going to kill themselves without realizing it. So, I want you to realize that life is not the end, it's the beginning. Death is not the end, it's the beginning. Don't be afraid. I had cancer. I had it for 5 years before I could do anything about it. I was in constant pain for those 5 years. So I probably had it for more than 5 years. That was the second time I had it, too. Same place. And when my mother passed away, I got enough money so I could start paying health insurance. And I was able to take care of it. Then I had a heart attack. Before that, I had a stroke. Before the first time I had cancer. And since then, I've had heart attacks and I've had strokes. I almost lost a leg. None of it bothered me, though. Because I still had a good life. I made myself have a good life. When I was in the pain from the cancer, I ignored it. I still had a good life, even though I was in pain. When I'd lay in bed, if I couldn't sleep on the side that I had the cancer, but when I was sleeping on the other side, blood would go down into my ear. So I had to put cotton in my ears. And it smelled. And I'd get on the bus and somebody would sit next to me and they'd move. But then some of them wouldn't. Especially when they found out what the problem was. But I didn't blame them. Something I probably would have done if I sat next to myself. In fact, there were times when I just didn't like it. It really bothered me. So, but you have to realize that's life. I'm trying to find another song, but it's not happening right now. But I will find something I want to play. How about Scott-Heron and I'm coming from a broken home.
I want to make this a special tribute to a family that contradicts the concepts, heard the rules but wouldn't accept, and women folk raised me and I was full grown before I knew I came from a broken home. Sent to live with my grandma down south, where my uncle was leaving and my grandfather had just left for heaven, they said. And as every ologist would certainly note, I had no strong male figure, right? But Lily Scott was absolutely not your mail order, room service, typecast black grandmother. I was moved in with her temporarily, just until things were patched, till this was patched, until that was patched, until I became at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 the patch that held Lily Scott, who held me, and like them four, I became one more, and I loved her from the absolute marrow of my bones, and we was holding on. I come from a broken home. She had more than the 5 senses. She knew more than books could teach, and raised everyone she touched just a little bit higher, and all around her there was a natural sense, as though she sensed what the stars say, what the birds say, what the wind and the clouds say. A sense of soul and self, that African sense. And she raised me like she raised 4 of her own. And I was hurt and scared and shocked when Lily Scott left suddenly one night, and they sent a limousine from heaven to take her to God, if there is one. So I knew she had gone. And I came from a broken home. And so my life has been guided, and all the love I needed was provided, and through my mother's sacrifices I saw where her life went. To give more than birth to me, but life to me. And this ain't one of them cliches about black women being strong, because hell, if you're weak, you're gone. But life, courage, determined to do more than just survive. And too many homes have a missing woman or man without the feeling of missing love. Maybe there are homes that are hurt, but there are no real lives that hurt will not reach, but not broken. Unless the homes of soldiers stationed overseas or lost in battles are broken. Unless the homes of firemen, policemen, construction workers, seamen, railroad men, truckers, pilots who lost their lives, but not what their lives stood for. Because men die, men lose, they are lost, and they leave. And so the women, I came from what they called a broken home, but if they ever really called at our house, they would have known how wrong they were. We were working on our lives and our homes, dealing with what we had, not what we didn't have. My life has been guided by women, but because of them, I am a man. God bless you, Mama, and thank you.
Well, I'm going to close it early. And before I go, I'm going to play a song called Let the Children Live. Have a good day. Have a good week. Have a good month and a good year. Most of all, have a beautiful life. And thank you for being you. Good night.
Let the children live. Just give them half a chance. Don't take away their right to life. Please leave them in God's hands. Just let the children live. Please hear their silent cry. They're calling out to you and me to save their precious lives. Just let the children live. The choice is yours and mine. Decisions are so hard to make, but oh, how great a big mistake if we should take their lives. This child you cannot see is waiting patiently to share the love he has to give, to love you endlessly. Don't take away her chance to give her love to you, and let no man decide their fate. And if you follow through, God will take care of you. Let the children live. They're precious in God's sight. He knows them all, each one by one. His pleasure, His delight. Just let the children live. No matter how you feel, 'cause feelings they will come and go. But little babies need to know you let the children live. Don't take away her chance to give her love to you, and let no man decide their fate. And if you follow through, God will take care of you. Let the children live and tell them of His love, how Jesus died upon the cross and shed His precious blood to let the children live. For then the day will come when they will find themselves like you. They will sure remember to let the children live.
For Thou did form me in my inward parts, O God. Thou did weave me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to Thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made.
Don't take away their chance to give
no man decide their fate. And if you follow through, God will take care of you. God will take care of you.
Okay, I did that show almost 2 years ago. And since I'm doing this Words of Wisdom show, I decided to start bringing back some of my old shows. That last song, I did a show on a little girl in Detroit. She was 7 and she was murdered by the police. And then towards the end of that show, I played this song, and I started to cry. And I did a thing on abortion. I had it on a show a few days ago, and if you get a chance, go back and listen to it. So anyway, I'm going to close this one down now. And I want everybody to have a good day, a good week, a good month, and a good year. But most of all, I want you to have a beautiful life. And thank you for being you. Okay, I did replay that a little while ago. It's not in the archives anymore. But it will be in my archives on my website and a few other places that you will find. So anyway, have a good one.